And shifting focus to the Indo-Pacific, where the Philippines is countering Chinese expansionism practices.
Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. says the Philippines and its security allies will take measures to counter any attempt by China to impose an air defense zone or restrict freedom of flights over the South China Sea.
China has just taken another big step in the South China Sea, and the world is paying close attention. In a move that's got global powers on high alert, China's aggressive strategy is sparking fears of a new era of conflict. This is about power, dominance, and the growing struggle for control in one of the busiest and most important waterways on the planet. The stakes couldn't be higher. Trillions of dollars in trade pass through these waters every year, and any conflict here would definitely affect nearby countries. As alliances shift and military forces move into position, the world is left wondering, is this the start of something bigger? Will global powers push back, or will they try to avoid direct confrontation? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how far is China willing to go, and what happens if someone decides to stop them? Stay with us as we dig into all the details. At the heart of China's strategy in the South China Sea is its huge economic interest. This region is a lifeline for global trade and a potential goldmine of natural resources. Every year, about 1/3 of the world's shipping passes through these waters, carrying goods worth trillions of dollars. Any disruption in this area could cause major problems for global markets. Beyond trade, the South China Sea is also believed to have huge reserves of oil and natural gas, which China sees as important to securing its growing energy demands. With China's economy expanding rapidly, having control over these resources is a strategic priority. In March 2025, China increased its deep-sea exploration activities, deploying research vessels to study the seabed. While these missions are officially for scientific purposes, many experts believe they are part of a bigger plan to map out energy resources and strengthen China's military control of the area. Also, the South China Sea is one of the most fish-rich regions in the world, and millions of people in Southeast Asia depend on it for their livelihoods. Over the years, Chinese fishing fleets backed by Coast Guard ships have been pushing into waters claimed by other nations, often leading to clashes. In February 2025, Filipino fishermen reported being chased away by Chinese patrol boats, which brought about outrage in the Philippines and raised further tensions between the two nations. Over the years, Beijing has steadily built artificial islands in disputed waters, turning them into fully operational military bases with airstrips, radar stations, and missile defenses. These heavily fortified outposts allow China to project power far beyond its mainland, giving it an undeniable advantage in the region. China insists that most of the South China Sea belongs to it, pointing to historical maps and documents as justification. However, this claim overlaps with territories claimed by several other nations, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. In early February 2025, China's Hainan Maritime Safety Administration announced military exercises in the South China Sea from February 11th to 13th, enforcing no entry zones during these periods. On February 12th, the Southern Theater Command reported a routine patrol, accusing the Philippines of actions undermining regional peace and stability. Additionally, China expanded its oceanographic research, deploying vessels like Shangyang Hong 01 and Dongfang Hong 3 to map the seabed, activities with potential military applications. But China's strategy is also about economic control. The South China Sea is one of the busiest trade routes in the world, with trillions of dollars in goods passing through each year. By strengthening its hold on the region, China gains leverage over global trade, making it clear that anyone who wants to operate freely in these waters will have to do so on its terms. China also uses its massive fishing fleet and maritime militia to establish dominance, often clashing with local fishermen from neighboring countries. By gradually expanding its presence, China is sending a message. It sees the South China Sea as its own, and it's willing to go to great lengths to enforce that belief. The most immediate concern of China's strategy is the potential for direct military conflict. China's growing naval power, combined with its increasing willingness to confront foreign ships, raises the risk of an accidental clash that could spiral into a larger crisis. Countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia frequently report encounters with Chinese Coast Guard ships and military vessels. Fishermen are harassed, survey ships are blocked, and foreign naval patrols are challenged, all signs that Beijing is willing to enforce its claims by any means necessary. Another major concern is freedom of navigation. The South China Sea is a vital artery for global trade, with about a third of all international shipping passing through it. Despite a 2016 UN tribunal ruling that invalidated these claims, China has continued its militarization efforts, constructing airstrips, radar systems, and missile installations on artificial islands. Such actions threaten the sovereignty of neighboring nations and jeopardize the principle of freedom of navigation, a cornerstone of international maritime law. If China gains full control, it could dictate who can and cannot use these waters. This would give Beijing unprecedented economic and political power, allowing it to pressure countries that rely on these shipping routes. The fear is that China could use this control as a geopolitical weapon, restricting access to nations that don't align with its interests. The environmental damage caused by China's island building is another issue. Large-scale dredging, construction, and military activities have destroyed coral reefs and marine ecosystems, threatening the livelihoods of millions who depend on fishing. The combination of military aggression, economic leverage, and environmental harm has made China's South China Sea strategy a growing cause for alarm across the world. The United States has been deeply involved in the South China Sea, seeing China's actions as a direct challenge to international law and regional stability. One of the main ways the U.S. pushes back is through freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, where American warships sail through disputed waters to challenge Beijing's claims. In March 2025, the U.S. Navy sent a guided missile destroyer through waters near the Spratly Islands, an area China claims as its own. Beijing quickly condemned the move, calling it a provocation, and sending its own warships to shadow the U.S. vessel. But Washington defended the operation, saying it was necessary to ensure that international waters remain open to all. Beyond military actions, the U.S. is also strengthening alliances with countries in the region. In February 2025, American officials met with leaders from the Philippines, Japan, and Australia to discuss joint military exercises and increase defense cooperation. The goal is clear: to create a united front against China's growing influence. Countries directly affected by China's acts, like the Philippines and Vietnam, have repeatedly taken their disputes to international courts, seeking legal rulings to challenge China's claims. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in favor of the Philippines, declaring China's 9-dash line invalid under international law. However, China outright rejected the ruling and continued its activities, showing that it is not afraid to defy international norms. The international community has responded with diplomatic protests, legal challenges, and military demonstrations. In February 2025, the Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro warned that the Philippines and its allies would challenge any attempt by China to impose an Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, over the South China Sea. Allied nations, including Japan, Australia, and India, expressed concerns over China's activities. In February 2025, multinational naval exercises like AMAN 2025 and Exercise Komodo saw participation from over 60 countries, emphasizing collaborative maritime security and addressing global maritime challenges. Other global powers, including the European Union, India, and Australia, have also expressed concern. While they may not be directly involved in the disputes, they recognize that instability in the South China Sea affects global security and trade. The fear is that if China is allowed to expand unchecked, it could set a dangerous precedent for other territorial disputes around the world. One of the biggest issues in this dispute is that China's claims go against international law. Despite the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruling in 2016 that China had no legal basis for its vast territorial claims in the South China Sea, in February 2025, China's Coast Guard blocked a Philippine supply mission to a grounded warship in the Second Thomas Shoal, a move that directly violated international law. The Philippines, backed by the U.S., filed a diplomatic protest, but China remained defiant. This pattern is concerning because it undermines the entire international legal system. If China can ignore rulings without consequences, other powerful countries might do the same in future disputes. This could weaken the authority of institutions like the United Nations and create a world where might makes right instead of laws and agreements deciding global conflicts. While the South China Sea dispute may seem like a regional conflict, its effects reach far beyond Asia. For Europe, the biggest concern is trade. Besides trade, it also has impacts on international law and geographical stability. Many European economies depend on imports and exports that pass through the South China Sea. If China gains full control, it could impose restrictions, raising shipping costs and creating economic uncertainty. Countries like Germany, France, and the UK have voiced concerns, and some have even sent naval ships to conduct the patrols in the region as a show of support for international law. Beyond trade, there are also strategic and security implications. If China successfully asserts its dominance in the South China Sea without facing significant pushback, it could embolden other countries with territorial ambitions. Russia, for example, could see this as a sign that aggressive expansion works, potentially influencing its actions in Eastern Europe. Similarly, other disputes in places like the Arctic or the East China Sea could escalate, as nations take cues from China's playbook. In March 2025, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy visited a Philippine Coast Guard station in the disputed waters, which led to strong criticism from China. This highlighted the growing tensions between China and Western countries. Around the world, people worry that China's actions could encourage other countries to make similar territorial claims. This could weaken international rules and lead to more military buildup in disputed areas. There is also the risk of a larger military conflict involving major powers. If a clash between China and another country, such as the Philippines, Japan, or the US, turns violent, it could trigger a broader confrontation that draws in multiple nations. Given the presence of US military bases in the region and defense agreements with allies, any conflict in the South China Sea has the potential to spiral into a global crisis. From China's perspective, its South China Sea strategy is a necessary step toward securing its national interests. It sees itself as reclaiming territory that historically belongs to it and believes that controlling these waters is essential for its security and economic future. For China, having a strong presence in the region reduces the risk of foreign interference and ensures that it has direct control over vital trade routes and resources. For smaller nations in the region, China's rise presents a difficult choice. Either align with Beijing and accept its dominance, or resist and risk economic and military consequences. For global powers like the US and its allies, the challenge is figuring out how to counter China's expansion without triggering a full-scale conflict. In the end, whether China's South China Sea strategy is good or bad depends on who you ask. For China, it's a move toward greater influence. For the rest of the world, it's a growing problem that could reshape global politics in ways we have yet to fully understand. With tensions continuing to rise, there are several ways this situation could unfold, and not all of them are peaceful. One dangerous possibility is that the situation escalates into open conflict. With China becoming more aggressive and the US stepping up its presence, a military clash could happen by accident. For example, if a Chinese warship or aircraft collides with a US vessel during a patrol, it could trigger a larger military confrontation. Given that both nations have powerful armed forces, this would be a global crisis with serious consequences. A more likely scenario is continued low-level confrontations, where China keeps pushing its claims and other nations push back diplomatically and militarily. This could mean more US patrols, more joint military exercises, and more confrontations at sea between China and its neighbors. The best-case scenario would be a diplomatic solution, where China and other countries agree to a set of rules to manage the dispute peacefully. There have been talks of creating a code of conduct for the South China Sea, but progress has been slow. In March 2025, ASEAN nations met in Jakarta to discuss the issue, but China showed little interest in compromising. Ultimately, the world is watching closely. How this conflict unfolds could shape global politics for years to come, determining whether international laws remain strong or if powerful nations can simply take what they want.